afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, do we have to do what we do at school? Clap 3 times? Okay, my name is Antonio Booth, I'm Reverend Antonio Booth. I'm one of the trustees at the RCS Community Library, which is Robina Queen Selkirk Community Library. And in celebration of African American History Month, which is February, we invited James Lipscomb to be our guest speaker, and it's going to be a discussion about his memoir called I Got Shoes. I'm so glad that we can have him here because he's a native of Coeymans, New York. He grew up in the area called the Hamlet, and so it's a pleasure to have him here to share his memoirs. I'm sure many of you are excited as we are about having him. I'm going to give a brief bio about him. He has held leadership positions in local, state, and national organizations, including the State Bar of California, the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, the Practicing Law Institute, the Citizens Budget Commission of New York, the Citizens Housing and Planning Council of New York, and at Graffiti Ministries Incorporated. And as a member of the Economic Club of New York, as a former executive vice president and general counsel of a Fortune 40 public company, and being well known for his willingness to speak the truth to power, Lipscomb has received numerous awards and accolades in recognition of his achievements. Some of those accolades include being named to the Inside Council's magazine 2006 list of the top 50 most influential in-house counsel in North America, and being the 2009 recipient of the National Bar Association's Human Marion Sweat Award for National Achievement. James Lipscomb received his associate degree from Hudson Valley Community College, all right, community colleges, a BA degree cum laude from Howard University, a 3-time graduate that I'm married to, a JD degree from Columbia University School of Law, and an LLM, a corporation degree from New York University School of Law. He is admitted to practice law in New York, California, federal courts, and the U.S. Supreme Court, and is also the author of Structuring Complex Real Estate Transactions, a reference book. In 2004, James Lipscomb co-founded the Center for Hope in Haiti, Incorporated, a Connecticut nonprofit corporation for the purpose of developing and operating an orphanage and a school in Hinchy, Haiti. The title of his memoir is based on an old gospel song of the same name, I Got Shoes. Lipscomb is a God-loving man, receiving inspirations from his faith in God and the churches he's attended throughout his life. A native of Coeymans, New York, Lipscomb is now retired and resides in Scottsdale, Arizona with his wife, Nancy. So, this book chronicles the first 25 years of his life, from humble beginnings, struggles, and achievements that led him on this incredible journey to law school and success, while also sharing his perspective of growing up as an African American during this time in history and how his life was impacted by the environment around him. So it is a pleasure to introduce and to present to those who already know him, James Lipscomb.
Thank you very much. Who was that you were just talking about? You know, when you've been around as long as I have, I guess things just pile up. Thank you all for coming out this evening. I know that you had a choice to be somewhere else, and you chose to be here, and that is quite meaningful as far as I'm concerned. I also had a choice to be somewhere else. I chose to be here. I had a different reason. It was snowing at my house. I am from Scottsdale, Arizona, where we do not get snow, except for yesterday. It caught everybody by surprise, and I was happy to get out of town. Although my wife wasn't too happy because the word came by that we should shake the tree so the snow would fall off. And she would say, how do you shake the tree? And of course, I don't know how you shake a tree. But the sun will melt it. The sun will be back. In Scottsdale, we have 300 days of sunshine. 100 of those days is above 100. And 30 of that 100 is above 110. So we prefer to be out of town during the last 30. minutes above 110. Let me begin by thanking the RCS Library for having me. It is an honor for me to be here. The book itself covers, as you said, the first 25 years of my life here at RCS and in Coeymans. Perhaps a little known fact is I went to school in this building. I went to the 5th grade, and that was when they were running out of school space, and they converted the roller rink into a school, and they put the 5th and 6th grade here. So I actually got knocked out here. we used to play something called dodgeball. Some of you may recall what that was. It was kind of silly because you would run back and forth and somebody would throw the ball at you. Now you have to look at one of two things, the ball or the person that's coming to you. Well, I was looking at the ball, and obviously I got knocked out. Concussion right outside the building here, and the ball was coming at me. So I didn't put that in the book. I probably should have. But it's just something that occurred to me. In putting this book together, I started thinking about this back in the 1970s. I started to see Coeymans in transition from what it used to be. And I wrote things down, and I went away from it, and I wrote some other stuff down, went away from it. And I just sort of kept doing this until I start not recalling things. so I said, I better start putting it down and keep it. So what you have in this book is a compilation of actually stories. Each one could probably be unpacked in, I guess, 1,000 words or more. And what I tried to do is pick ones that were of interest to me. And I have to admit, there was things in there that I took out, and there are things that were not in there that I put in. It is not a tell-all book by any means. It is a tell-some. You know, you tell some things. Some of them are somber. Some of them are funny, I hope. Some of them are about my experiences. And to tell somebody. And so you're part of the somebody that I'm trying to tell, because I tried to just sort of compose a short synopsis of the life in the first 50 years of the 20th century here. It's not written down anywhere that I'm aware of. And there was a number of people that came here. At the time, they were called Negroes. And my book, by the way, pays homage to the fact that for a while we were called Negroes, then we were called Black, now African American. So you won't find an African American in my book because it doesn't go that far. So it all talks about Negroes and Blacks. So if you think I'm using terms that's out of step with what you hear today, it was intentional, but it was also paying homage to the way we called ourselves. Many of those people reside in Grove. They didn't go back home. Many of them were sent back home. Many of them had jobs here. They worked here, they lived here, they raised their families here. But all of that is gone. So I thought that what I would try to do is put some of it down, at least during the time that I was here. So if you buy the book, and I do want you to buy it, you'll see that there may be things that I didn't say that you know. And I always say that if you know it better than I do, fine, you can write your own book. I don't purport to know everything, and I don't purport to recall everything exactly as it was. But I wanted to put down some of the history. And you will see part of it almost reads like the Bible. I try to put down every name I could think of. So I went by everybody's house, and anybody that I knew in that house, and I practically knew everybody at the time, I tried to name it. Because that'd probably be the only opportunity in history that their names will ever get into a book. And so I tried to put them all in there. If I could not recall the name, doesn't mean that I was excluding them, it just means I couldn't recall their name. So I got as many in as I could. The book is not just about Coeymans. Actually, the book is about me. And so it goes beyond Coeymans itself. It takes me up to Albany, and all the, quote, great things I did there. I call them great because I didn't get caught. So, and it goes to college and the things that went on there, and then on to law school, and then I stopped. Because that covered like 25 years, and it was almost 50 years ago. And I said, well, this is a kind of a good place to stop. My life changed dramatically from 1971 going forward. But underneath that was the underpinning of Coeymans, of Albany, and the things that I did in between. And so, whenever, like when you read off that list, I just said, well, who are you really talking about? You can draw a straight line back to where it all came from. There are people who are not in this room who were very influential in my life, and I think contributed to who I am. So I wanted to pay homage to them. So I don't know how many people have read the book yet. Yeah, we got some people who have. I'll read you don't mind if I read you. I have to tell you, my grandkids came over for the holidays, Christmas. They always bring me a gift, but they brought me one this time that I'd rather give them back. They brought me a cold. They've gone home and I still got the cold. So if the voice sounds like it's crackly, it's because I'm dealing with that. I asked the library for some water. He said, we don't have any water here. I said, oh no. So fortunately, the young lady took one out of her personal case. Antonio, in addition to thanking you for allowing me to be here, I would ask that you give the staff some water. The introduction is actually kind of where it all started, so I think I'll start with that. The rain was coming down at a steady pace in the Indian summer of September 1950. I could see it cheating off the eaves of the roof. We lived in the ground floor flat of a two-story company house that had a tin roof and no gutters. The rain formed puddles along the sides of the house, and little streams ran away from the house to a ditch alongside the garden. It was raining when I got up that morning. It had not stopped. I was waiting for everyone to come back. I didn't know then where they had gone. All I knew was that some of the older ones and sisters went with my mother and father to in two black cars with a white man. Green and Francis Motley, my aunt and uncle, who lived in the flat upstairs, followed behind them in their car. Nobody in my family knew how to drive, and we didn't own a car. "They coming," somebody yelled. We all ran to the windows to watch the cars as they turned into our driveway. An earthen path with gravel on top. It was muddy, the puddles were everywhere. Slowly the cars approached, attempting to get as close to the house as possible. There was no front porch, just a wide plank in front of the door. When the cars stopped, the doors opened slowly, and everyone seemed to get out at the same time. Notwithstanding the rain, they seemed to be moving very slowly. Then I noticed, despite the rain, I could see the tears coming down her face. This is This was my mother. She could hardly move. Everyone seemed to be lending a hand to help her get into the house. One by one, they entered the house, stood in the middle of the floor, and it seemed as everyone was sad. And many were crying except my father. He looked somewhat tired. I wanted to ask what was wrong. However, I was scared and I started to cry as well. I don't know why. I imagine it's because everyone seemed so sad. It wasn't until several days later that I realized my sister Lois was not coming home. I only have a faint memory of Lois. She was only about 3 years old, the next youngest child after me. She never did walk or talk as a child, even when she was old enough to be talking and walking. No one ever told me what was wrong with Lois, but I believe it was diagnosed today as polio. She slept in a yellow wrought iron crib that had rockers. Sometimes she would just cry, and everyone seemed helpless. This is my first encounter with anyone's death, and I didn't know anything about it. I was too young, obviously, to go because the rest of the family went, and we were left home waiting for them to return. I'm one of 14 children, and Lois was the next one to me, and I have 2 younger sisters that followed her. So it's sort of like the stepping off point where you come of age, but you're only like about 2 or 3 years old. You realize that death happens. No one knows her passing. There wasn't even a grave marker in Grove Cemetery until about 5 years ago. Now, this was from 1950 to about five years ago. I wanted to put that as the front part of the book because it is a memory that still is with me, as you can probably tell. And she won't be able to tell that memory. So I put it there because it is sort of saying, okay, who speaks for Lois? And I don't think anybody will ever speak for her again. So I did. So that was the reason for that. Anyway, I didn't mean to start off on a honors. It only goes up from here. There are some other very interesting pieces. I would say Riverview Missionary Baptist Church.
Yeah.
Near and dear to my heart. Thank you, Antonio and Roxanne, for making such a successful evening for me. Anybody remember when Brother Ivan used to hear on Sunday mornings? On the radio. That was sort of your getting up piece to get ready for church and go over to hear Reverend Satin. Some of you might remember Reverend Satin, right? Well, I do. And in fact, I'm going to play a little bit here for you, if you don't mind. It's not in the book, but I think it's worth, our taking a look at and bringing it back a little bit. So if I can find it. I know a number of you in here who would not know this book from my playing, so I'm going to play it just so you know. What happens when you can't find it? Well, I'll find it for you. It was that song that was played on WEBY that we would all listen to. And he would play songs by Mahalia Jackson, Clara Ward, the Five Blind Boys, James Cleveland, the Soul Steers, Dixie Hummingbirds. These are the old gospel singers. And then the choirs at Riverview would sometimes sing those same songs. And in my opinion, most often better than some of the ones who had it on record. And they were proud to do it. I'll read here, it says, Pleasant Floyd was perhaps the most versatile singer of them all. He would sing a variety of songs in his own style as well as that of others. Some of my favorites by him were a song made famous by Reverend James Cleveland called Peace Be Still, and a song by Sam Cooke as a member of the gospel group Soul Steers, The Last Mile of the Way. If any of you can recall hearing Pleasant, you know what a wonderful voice that he had and the wonderful man of God that he was. Mm-hmm. So it was indeed an honor for me to include him in my book. Rather than my just reading everything, actually I'll take some questions from you as well, if you have them.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said you had the song. Did you get that from the radio? Because I don't think anybody taped anything back then.
Fortunately, you can. Fortunately, you know, there's something called Apple. and
Only believe.
That was the one that used to be playing while my and by the time you get through the fourth song, it's about 9:35, and we need to start getting ready to go over to the church. And my Aunt Frances, who lived upstairs, would put the light rolls, the light rolls up. They used to make special rolls on Sunday. And don't ask me how to cook, I only eat. But they were so special that they would rise. And so they would have to put them in the pan before they go to church. So they would rise by the time they get home. And then they put them in the oven. So you knock them down. Go ahead, tell us about it. Those were things that would happen at that time.
Yes.
Sure. I'll tell you something about Coeymans School. Since I told you that I went to school in this building. Coeymans School was overcrowded, and the school district decided to convert Beck's Rollery into classrooms for the 5th and 6th grades. Since there was a large space in the middle of the building, most of our recess took place indoors. If the weather was bad outside, we would sometimes have a dance after lunch. This presented problems because while the girls would dance with other girls, only a few boys wanted to dance with the girls. Moreover, my brother Eugene and I were the only two Negro boys. We took turns dancing with Betty Comet there, the only Negro girl. We did not want to get in trouble with trying to dance with a white girl. Mrs. Newt was my 5th grade teacher. Say that again? Don't worry, let's repeat yourself. Mrs. Newt was my 5th grade teacher. She turned out to be the strictest of all my teachers. It was traditional for the 5th and 6th grade classes to go on field trips. Mrs. Newt would hear none of it. She refused to take us on any trips. Other classes in the building went on several trips. You can tell we were not happy. She constantly gave us tests based on her homework assignments, yet she was a kind person who seemed to want the best for her students. We started out disliking her as a teacher and ended up admiring her for her desire to see all of us become good students. Our lack of field trips became a badge of honor. I don't know if she's still with us, but
I don't think so.
excuse me, you don't think so? Well,
She's in the building.
she lived in the Baltimore. There it is.
I'm probably the oldest one.
Anybody?
John had her.
Remember Mrs. Newt? I think one of these ladies, right? You do?
Sit down.
I know when I was reading the book, you stated that I guess the kids from Coeymans Hamlet would walk to school, and then you have another division, being bused to school and how cold it was. And Did you talk about that experience? Because how far were you walking to school? It wasn't the school that's
Not
not the civil building, not the civil building, not with the civil.
Yes,
Was that one?
it was a civil building.
Mhm.
So we were walking from the hill in the bottom to the civil building. I know people complain about climate change nowadays and how cold it is. It was colder back then. A lot colder. All of our winters were sub-zero. Many of them had 3 or 4 feet of snow. Okay, so it was cold. And we had to walk. And because we walked, in the wintertime, when we got to school, we were so cold, we sat next to the radiator. But because we were so cold and sat next to the radiator, our hands began to thaw, our feet began to thaw, and we began to cry because they ached. So I actually have frostbite hands right now. I can't hold a glass of water without losing circulation in my hands. But there was that one time when Loretta Gladney, Mickey
Yeah.
Gladney,
Yeah, we walked to school.
remember she went to sleep on the side of the road, and Mr. Duncan had to pick her up. And because he picked her up and took her to the doctors, we started riding the bus.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. We walked to school, and it was horrendous.
Of course.
Yeah.
So it took something like that, and fortunately, he was late for school, and he saw this child along, who was right on Altomary's Hill, and was along the side of the road. He picked her up and took her to the doctors, and from then on, we were able to ride the
Because
bus.
the bus in front of your house.
Sure did. Only problem is, we didn't own it.
I should say where you live.
Yes, sir.
You said it was a company house. What was the company?
It was owned by the Brickyards then. I'm not sure whether it was Sutton and Sutherland or Powell and Minnick, but somewhere between the Brickyards, they own the house. Did they? I don't,
houses were Sutton and Sutherland.
I know that's who we paid the rent to.
Yes, sir.
We paid $9 a month. And they went to go up. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how many of the houses are still there? You said you went along and kind of remember the names. How many are still standing?
It doesn't exist anymore.
At all?
It's all gone. It all got bulldozed, I believe, in late '62 or '61.
Yeah.
They took all the houses off the hill and out of the bottom, except for Whitaker's house, because they own their own.
Yeah.
But that's no longer there either, so I'm not sure how that got demolished.
So the only building left is Riverview Baptist Church.
Well, Adamos is,
Oh,
it's no
yeah.
longer called Adamos, but that
Right.
building that's been retrofitted right there at the corner
Yeah,
is
those
part of the Adamos. It was the Adamos property, I'm not sure.
A bar and a church.
Well, they were related, you know.
At least the bar is no more.
soon as you found the same people in both places.
Saturday and Sunday.
At least one could open early.
But, James, speaking of walking to school, I can remember when we this is the way it was back then. It was myself, my brother Leonard, and Clifford. We all walked to school one day, and when we got to the Civic Center, I guess some flu had went by, and they didn't have any school, but we didn't know it because there was no communication. So we walked all the way up there, and then we all had to walk all the way back home.
Yeah, well, telephones were party lines back then.
Yeah.
And we didn't have one of those party lines. Does anybody know what party lines used to be? That's when the operator knew all your numbers.
So remember 1953.
Where exactly was the building that you were walking to?
Right here, the,
Civic Center.
what's it called now?
Oh, you're talking about
Yeah, it was
Okay, I got it.
an elementary school.
Well, now it's an apartment building.
Now it's an apartment.
School.
Elgin.
I went there.
Right. Yeah. We used to have a nice swimming pool in the back.
Yeah. Oh, I swim in it. That's what I'm there when you taught there. At Coeymans was the swimming pool there when you taught there.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to, can I make a comment?
Sure.
My grandfather was Joe Adama, Joe Marie Adama. And
I work here.
so you mentioned earlier about the cemetery and stuff. And I can only remember stories, and which were really good stories. My grandfather, when the first, some of the African Americans that came to Coeymans, some of the first generation, when they passed away, they wanted to they wanted to go back south to be buried, a lot of their families, but the families couldn't afford to transport their bodies back south. So my grandfather helped pay for transportation expenses so that the body could be transported back south. And also, my grandfather, in the 1920s, I think it was, helped financially support building the Riverview Baptist Church, the structure that's there now. My grandfather helped financial support to get that building built. So I personally, the reason why I'm here today is I have a strong sense of heritage and bonding to Coeymans. My mother and my Aunt Nancy was born in that bar building. They lived upstairs from the bar.
Right.
And so I have, even though my mother, when she got married to my father, we lived in Ravenna, but I still consider Coeymans my home, and I have a very strong sense of heritage to my community.
Well, I'll tell you a little story since you brought them up. I used to work for your grandfather and your grandmother. I used to sweep up at the bar. We would have to sweep the floor. It was a wooden floor that they would put oil on it. So if it was just a regular sweep, we would get 50 cents, and if we had to put oil, it was 75 cents. For your mom, when they built, grandmother, when they built the house on Frankel Avenue,
Yep.
I used to work for her, and she was a terrific woman. But we had one area where, well, I didn't particularly care for. In the front there's 50 windows. It's 5 down and 10 across.
And she was a clean freak.
She wanted me to wash those windows every week. Inside and out. And when I did the floors, it wasn't just one pail of water, I had to have 2. And I would have to use the soap water to wash and the rinse water to rinse. But I can tell you now that when she was in the other room, I used one pail when I got
I got one more quick comment. Everybody got along, everybody liked each other, everybody had respect for each other, and Coeymans did not experience any other problems that the rest of this country experienced back then. Everybody got along, everybody liked each other, everybody respected each other, and I'm proud of that fact, that we all got along and loved each other. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I think the point you make is well taken, but I look at it this way. Most of the people that I talk about in the book at the time were transplants from the South, Virginia, the Carolinas, and the like. They came out of situations where segregation was blatant. And they knew better that you don't do certain things, or else, bad things happen to you. So the opportunity to come to an area where bad things may not happen to you, they just acted like they were still down south. So they didn't reach out to associate beyond the people they associated with. And they told their children, watch what you say, watch what you do, don't put your hands on things that don't belong to you. And as long as you're doing those kind of things, it's pretty easy to get along with everybody. So that would be the way I would interpret that.
Two very separate communities. There was two very separate communities.
Yes, well, that's what I meant.
The outline you gave us, right, the Negro, Black, and then African American.
Right.
So what about color? Because that's where I came from. First I was colored, then I was a Negro, and then I was Black, Afro-American, and then African.
African American.
Yeah. Before your time, sorry.
No, because depends on where you were, it was interchangeable.
Oh, okay.
I didn't use the words they used in the South. I mean, there was only one word they had down there, and they didn't even say it right.
Okay. One of the things when I read the book, I noticed you described how you grew up in with one of 14 children, the house without running water. You kind of had to bootleg some electricity or something. But anyway,
Commit crimes.
you had someone else to commit crime. Anyway, but the thing I noticed, even in the midst of poverty, that you were very industrious. You were always finding a job. Like at 9 years old, you were got someone someone hired you to stack up wood. I think the Moltons, and then it's like you were always finding work. So could you tell us some of your work stories? Because they're all funny. Like with the painting, and then you went to Albany, you found some work there. So wherever you went, you were always finding. Even you weren't at an employment age. You were 9, 10, 11, 12, but you were always finding a way to earn some money. What motivated you?
And I was not alone, but the book was about me, so it wasn't to exclusion of anybody else. I think people did what they had to do. If you were old enough to work, you worked. There are a lot of things that you did. You went, you picked berries, not because you liked picking berries, because you wanted to eat them. So there's things that you did and some things you enjoyed doing. I enjoyed watching other people do what they do and seeing if I could do it. There was a man that used to name by the name of Albert Ninel, some of you may recall him. He used to live not too far from the church. And he was a painter, but he was a very meticulous painter.
Yes.
And I would watch what he did as a painter. And I just said, I can do that too. And so I started doing that in my own house, our house. Whenever they had some painted and wanted it done, I wanted to do it. It just so happens that Mrs. Sutton was at our house one time and saw I was painting, probably astounded that I was painting, because I was just, wasn't even as tall as I am now, I'm short. But I was doing the job, so she said, would you like to do some painting for me? And invited me to come down and do some painting down in the parsonage. I go to different churches, we call it the manse now. But the parsonage, I had to do some painting there. And then it just sort of snowballed because this is not a sexist statement, but ladies talk. And Mrs. Sutton talked to Mrs. Coles. Some of you may remember her. She had a house down in Catskill. Mrs. Coles wanted me to come down and do some painting for her. I did that. Mrs. Coles spoke to Pauline Sutton. I did some painting for Pauline. And Pauline spoke to her hairdresser, and so I did some painting for her. And each time as I was getting better, I tried to increase my price. Well, I did. I started out at 50 cents, and I got up to, I think, pretty close to $1. But then I ran into an obstacle. It took me longer to do the job than it was supposed to, because it was different than what they said. So rather than paying me more for a job that was difficult, I was paid less. Now, I could have responded by taking even longer, but I just wanted to get out of there. So I finished the painting and I got out of that. But being able to self-help is always important. I mean, I found out, for instance, after I got married, which I don't really cover, but the things that I learned before I got married, I was able to use. For instance, I learned how to do drapery, slip cover cutting, painting. In our first house, I did all of that stuff. Saved a lot of money. And so now when I see that work, I just grab the phone book. In fact, my wife was saying, "We're not going to get on that ladder."
You also said that you were working to help your parents or something. How did you use that money? You know, a lot of times most kids use the money to buy some candy and stuff. How did you use that money? How did you help your parents out with the money?
Well, there's any number of ways you do that. Anytime you have one less mouth to feed, it's healthy. So anytime you can clothe yourself, there's one less child you have to clothe. And anytime when Christmas time comes, there's something under the tree for everyone. That's helpful. And I put in the book because I thought it was noteworthy. My mom, who was always a very hardworking person, but she would often say she never had a new coat in her life. So I put in a book that, having worked at Mrs. Goldstein's, I saved up enough money to buy her a new coat. And I thought we would have to take her to the hospital. She was so overcome with the fact that she had a new coat, and perhaps even more so because I was the one who was able to do it for her. But those are the kind of things you do. You know, when you're a family, you just do stuff. You know, you may look back upon it and say, oh, did I really do that? And the thing is that it's the way you're brought up. You do what you have to do. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, uninformed about it and find this fascinating, but the community you grew up in that you now say is gone and was sometime in the 60s, actually the housing was bulldozed. What gradually, maybe others know just, well, what gradually happened? Did people leave voluntarily? Did employment dry up? What happened that people left here?
They asked us to.
Okay, that's what I really
We were told that it's no longer available. Bobby,
Yeah, but I think the conditions
Yeah.
that they saw, that the blacks were living in, we said, we got to do something about this. What are we gonna do? We're gonna knock down all the houses.
Okay.
And let them find living space where they got electricity, where they got, bathrooms inside the house, and things like that. And that's what it evolved to.
I don't think tearing down the houses was a bad thing. I think the bad thing is that they didn't build new ones.
Well, very substandard housing.
Well, they said they were gonna do it.
They said they were, but as I said, they did the former but not the latter.
Yeah.
So, you know, once the houses were gone and the people were gone, there was no incentive to put them back.
And another bad thing was that they didn't look out for other housing.
No,
You were on your own to go find a place to live. for your
everybody was
family.
looking.
And at that time, there wasn't many blacks in Ravina.
Right.
And they didn't rent the blacks. So
You had to go to Albany or you find a place to get
In
Right.
Queens,
Yeah.
right.
Was there any reimbursement for those losses? I mean, like, was this an eminent domain?
No, they were owned by the company.
But it wasn't eminent
I'm sorry.
There was an eminent
It wasn't
domain
eminent
because
domain
they
because
didn't
it was
own it.
owned by,
They didn't
it
own
was
the
owned by the
property.
brickyards.
Oh,
And Dr.
Sorry.
Mosher was the one who went in and condemned the houses from the history. And so so of course they were owned by the brickyard, so there was no eminent domain.
Right.
Because it was privately owned land, basically. All those houses were like migrant houses, and they were privately owned, so therefore there was no eminent domain.
So had the jobs dried up? You know,
No, people, the brickyard was still open.
so you think the brickyard would have a vested interest in giving you a place to live or, you know, finding some alternatives?
It was gradually
They
closing.
must have lost, yeah, maybe, yeah, it was closing.
Yeah, it was sold.
Okay.
I think the
In the late
brickyard was
50s,
open
it was
right to the
sold.
nineties.
I'm not having been privy to
Yes.
what was going on with the people who had the authority to do things.
Right.
You can only speculate.
Yeah, you've done too.
At the time they tore the houses down, the brickyard that had been didn't exist.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
The brickyard that my father and my grandfather and many of the black men down in Coeymans, the brickyard that they knew was gone. A lot of the men had left the brickyard and gone and found other means of employment. And it was just a time when the black population was saying, we better do something or nothing's gonna get done. And they started to move out and started to make life better for themselves.
Did they have to go to Albany then to find other
A
employment?
lot of them went to Albany, a lot of them stayed here. This is how his family left. He was born and raised here, but his family was in that exodus, permit me to say, that left Coeymans and went into Albany. Many of our families did. And at that time, before that happened, a lot of the gentlemen who came to work on the brickyard had brought their families from the south and had automatically gone to Albany to live because there was no place in Coeymans to live. There was no place in Coeymans to live. And when those houses were torn down, you know, it was time. It was time for them to, you know, I mean, it had been bubble gum and bubble gum and bubble gum for years, but it was time for them to go.
When we were collecting recordings, as the library was collecting, I guess it's maybe 5 or 8 years ago now. First of all, we were told that there were only a few people living in the housing in the bottoms by the time that they were actually torn down because they deteriorated so badly. And that some kind of deal had to be made in order, I think that the doctors bought them from the brickyard in order to get the health
No, early on.
certificate or something that
Early
they
on.
needed? Okay,
Early on, Dr. Mosher and Dr. LaFever had purchased the land.
okay.
They had purchased the land and they were in anticipation of building better housing. And they went through federal government, state, and county government, and town government. And town was where they got the problems. But they had been cleared in many steps that they had gone, and the juggernaut was here. And it never got off the ground. And the Mosers passed it on and sold the land. I shouldn't say the Mosers, the doctors passed it on, sold the land, and just called it something that wasn't ever gonna be. It was one problem after the other. First it was the water, then it was the sewage, then it was the electrical. And every time they went up against something, you know, they hit this block. So it was just given up. But as I said, at the time that those houses were torn down, you know, you were standing here and looking completely outdoors, being in the house. So it was time. It was time. And then it was like a new wave. The black had started to think a little differently and had become maybe gently more aggressive. But they were saying to themselves, if we don't do it now, we won't do it. So this is why the migration went to Albany. And those of us who, of course, love this area, stayed in this area. But it wasn't, enough housing to compensate for the number of families that we have. And at that time, a lot of our people were dying off too. We were losing a lot of our people in death. And the families were getting smaller. It had gotten down to children, parents were gone, and there was a different mentality that formed within the black community.
Is it fair to say that probably thousands, literally from the heyday of the Brickyard, Mr. Lipscomb, when you lived, or Mrs. Lipscomb, when you lived at the bottom, literally thousands of families, black families left and never came back to Coeymans? As you remember, hundreds, thousands?
I don't think it was ever thousands at
Hundreds,
one time.
hundreds,
Okay.
hundreds, hundreds.
Over time,
Hundreds,
Okay.
people
yes,
came
hundreds.
and left.
Mhm.
And
Hundreds.
And
Because
that's-
even at the time they had the company houses, as I grew up as a child, there were many families who were housed on the brickyards.
Right.
There was Sutton and Sutterly on this end. To the north, beyond X Farm, it was Powell and Minnick. And they ran full brickyards separately. And within that property of the business, there were housed many families. Many families were housed there that had come from Virginia, and basically mainly Virginia. And they lived on the brickyard. So it was between the company houses that many of you saw in your day, the little red houses as you drove up 144. There were people living also on the brickyards.
The other thing I wanted to say, I want to add one thing. Well, the automobile had become more common too, so you had
As I
a
said,
wider
part of the aggression.
possibility for employment.
Yes.
You could go to Albany and get a job and get there.
If you had a license.
And you knew how to drive.
And to that point, not having a license and some of the things that Mrs. Lipscomb just brought up, and the fact that you're here to talk about your experience and the existence that you were talking about that you came from, I'm wondering about the influential experiences and the influential people of our ancestors, all of us who are from here. How did those folks, and who were they, how did they play into your success and your motivations and your drive?
Well, when you start mentioning names, you by definition exclude people. And I don't intend to exclude anyone, but there's some people who still impact the way I think and act. And that's not to exclude the ones that I would not mention, but Deacon Leonard Carpentier comes to mind. I've never met, even after leaving, and up until this day, I've never met a more genuinely honest, God-fearing man. Right. And I've never heard him say an ill word to anyone or about anyone. Always had a positive conversation. And apart from that, he used to pick me up for Sunday school. And he was there on time. And before him, there was a gentleman by the name of Joseph Fleming, who made sure we all got to church on time. Never asked us to do anything. He just wanted us to come to church and learn what Inez Stevens had to teach me. She was my Sunday school teacher.
And her son is right over there.
She always will be. These are people, you can't just sort of quantify what that is, but they taught you how to live your life in a genuine, respectful way, and honest way. And those are things that people can't take from you. You know, and so I don't mind singing their praises for that.
Hi, I'm not familiar with your work or this area, but one of my book club members told me about this event. So I guess I have a couple questions.
Sure.
And forgive me if you answer them because I was a bit tardy. What inspired you to write this book? And we are planning on maybe using your book for discussion. Is there anything else that is not covered in the book that would, I guess, help us in our discussion? And thirdly, being from another country, what else can I take away from your experience as an African man living in upstate New York?
Well, I'll try to do them in reverse order, maybe, because I think the book, as I said earlier, and you wrote here, is really stories. And they're stories that I experienced. It's not all the stories I experienced, it's some of them. And if I had to do it all over again, some would be in, some would be out. That's just the way life is. At the time you're thinking this is what you do it for. So I would tend to think that what I would, and I'm not sure what organization you're talking about, you're coming from, but what I try to take away is all the positives in life. And you know, life comes as it is, not as you want it to be. Life isn't all positive. But if you're always looking at things as the glass being half full, you have a better view than when you look at it and see it half empty. And so that's what I would encourage people to do. Even in adversity, look for the positive. And when you're going through life where perhaps the cards aren't dealt to you the same way you like them dealt to you, when you sit in class beside people with new clothes on and you're sitting in class next to them with the class with the clothes that their parents gave you, and yet you're both equal there, and you're glad to be there. So you don't dwell on the fact that you're wearing the person's next to you's clothes. You dwell on the fact that you're both there to get an education. And so you start missing you miss the point if you deal with just the negative. And that's kind of the message that hopefully will come through here. It isn't just limited to Coeymans, as you probably see. It goes beyond that. But it is the framework that I use going forward. He just gave me that whatever sign here. This is a great discussion, but I don't want to take advantage of
So I hope you're able to stay, and I know you have books to sell. There are refreshments right out the door here. We have to move them outside because there's so many of you. So please stay, have refreshments, chat. I mean, I love hearing how like the fabric of our community is being woven right now. You know, the stories being shared. Please continue that, and I understand Mr. Lipscomb is able to stay for a while. So thank you very much.